Hello, and this is the second lecture from week 3. A couple of short ones this week. I'm sure you guys don't mind that too much. This second lecture is just providing you a little bit of context for the narrative of the Captivity by Mary Rowlandson. And this is one of the more popular works when I teach the class. It seems to be one of the ones that students really enjoy reading. And I find it incredibly interesting myself. The narrative of the Captivity, it's got a much longer title, as you'll see in the reading. It was, during its time, one of the most popular books printed in America, written in America during the Puritan era. It became extremely popular, so much so that it inspired a whole new genre, the Captivity narrative, which became very popular. And it became, as I say in the notes, became a prototype for a lot of other similar narratives written by people who had been captives, as well as written by writers interviewing people who have been captives. Cotton Mather, for instance, he writes hundreds and hundreds of books, but several of the books that he publishes were narratives of captivity of various people, because it happened fairly commonly. You can imagine these folks are really living out on the edge of society, and a very common way for the Native Americans to strike back at the colonists was to kidnap them and ransom them. It happens today in places like Iraq and Mexico and any other place where you have sort of a semi-lawless society. It's a very common tactic, and it happened very, very frequently. Mary Rowlandson's story is particularly good, not just because it's a prototype, but because of the way it's written. It's very clear, it's very straightforward, it's from her own point of view, and it is her own voice. I think it's very authentic, and when you read it, I think you get the real feel for what happened and what she went through. And it was extremely influential, again, not just in America, but also back in England. It's looked upon as one of the precursors to Gothic literature, as a matter of fact, and there have been several books written on that. To give you a little bit of context, is that this takes place during what was referred to as King Philip's War. It was really the natives' last-ditch attempt to have some sort of organized resistance to the colonists during the Puritan era. And this is after there had been sort of an economic collapse. For a long time, they'd been building economic ties between the natives and the colonists. But there had been an economic collapse. There's an interesting book called the Red King's War, and it discusses the wampum-based economy, which I think is kind of funny. But it's true that the handicrafts that the Native Americans made were for a short time extremely popular and sought after by people back in Europe. Much like the furs that the French were getting in Canada and in the area that later became the Louisiana Purchase. The furs were very popular, and they made a lot of money for the traders. The same thing was going on with the native handicrafts and the wampum, which was something that they used as money. It could be shells and feathers. It could be carvings. So wampum covers a lot of territory as far as what it is. But that was very popular for a while, and the natives had a lot of economic power for a short period of time while that was popular. Well, when that fell out of favor and fell out of popularity and there's no longer in demand, that basically left a hole in their economy, and a lot of the natives were starving, literally. They'd given up their lands, they'd given up the way that they'd lived, their hunting and gathering. They'd lost a lot of their places where they had been sort of nomadic, semi-nomadic, and roamed around, and a lot of the places they used to hunt had been taken over by colonists. So the Native Americans formed some sort of loose confederacies, and there was no organized resistance. There were small battles and skirmishes. There was a lot of brutality and awfulness on both sides. We get a description of a native attack on Mary Rowlandson's settlement But there were similar attacks by colonists on native settlements as well. It was just as awful on both sides, and we all pretty much know what the end result was. Now, Rowlandson's narrative, I think these are a few things I want to point out for you to pay attention to. Is that it is just steeped in what we call the Puritan imagination. That she is writing from a point of view that is purely Puritan. The comparisons that she uses, all the biblical allusions that she uses, these are not artifice. These aren't artistic metaphors. This is the way that these people thought. The Puritans thought of themselves as the Israelites come to take back the promised land, the land that was promised to them. They are there to create their new world, and they feel like they're being fought by these demons and devils that surround them. And so, the way that they interpret what goes on is based upon that imagination. The way that Mary Rowlandson writes, her style of writing, very much sounds like Old Testament language. It sounds like the Bible. So that when she works in passages from the Bible, they don't sound odd. I mean, they sound like, the way that she thinks and the way that she speaks. Rowlandson is not unusual in looking at life this way. The experiences that she goes through, as I said, weren't extremely unusual, but they were unusual in the fact that she chooses to record them. She chooses to express them in such a realistic manner that still captures our imaginations today. So some things to watch for. Pay attention to the biblical allusions that she uses. Notice where they come from. They're primarily Old Testament references. They really did see themselves in sort of Old Testament terms as God's chosen people fighting for survival. Make sure you don't quit reading after she's rescued, because the last little bit is extremely interesting. It's where she really analyzes the situation that she was in and what that means to her spiritually and emotionally. In a lot of ways, to me, that's the most interesting part of the narrative, is the way that she frames it, the context that she puts it in, especially those last few paragraphs where she talks about having sometimes wished to have gone through some sort of trials and tribulations to test her faith. Because that's the important part of being a chosen person to a Puritan, is, can I face up to adversity? Can I face a challenge? And does God show me favor by trusting that I can face that challenge? The Lord scourgeth those he loveth the most, I believe is one of the passages that she quotes from. And so the question is, how has this experience changed her? How has going through this experience of captivity and the death of people very close to her, the death of children, how has that affected her? How has that shaped her? How has that made her think of herself any differently? Or maybe it has confirmed things that she believed about herself and about God and her faith. So just be thinking about those things and focusing on those things as you read.